Welcome to the Jack Hopkins Show podcast, where stories about the power of focus and resilience are revealed by the people who live those stories. And now, the host of the Jack Hopkins Show podcast, Jack Hopkins.
Hello and welcome to the Jack Hopkins Show podcast. I am your host, Jack Hopkins. Today's guest is Nina Burleigh. She's a writer and an investigative journalist. And if you've listened to previous podcast episodes of the Jack Hopkins Show podcast, you know how much I love investigative journalists. They play such a critical role in our society, and particularly in the last decade. The realm of Nina's work is vast. It's vast geographically. It's vast in terms of the topics she's written about, stories that she's covered, and I think you're really going to be impressed with the depth of her knowledge and understanding of the topics that she talks about. She's authored several books. The two that I'll mention, and you can check out, by the way, you can check out the rest of her bio and all of the books that she's written at ninaburleigh.com, and I will list that in the show notes. The Fatal Gift of Beauty, The Trials of Amanda Knox. That was published in 2012. Golden Handcuffs, The Secret History of Trump's Women. That was published in October of 2018. Virus, Vaccinations, the CDC, and the Hijacking of America's Response to the Pandemic, which was published in 2021. There are many more books. There are lots of stories and many rich and colorful experiences. And Nina Burleigh is going to talk about some of them over the next hour. So get ready, buckle up, and let's dive in to my conversation with Nina Burleigh. All right, Nina, so I know your parents were hippies. You were raised by hippies, and looking at your accomplishments, they didn't do too bad of a job of raising their child. Did you have siblings?
I did. I'm the oldest of three. And I say they're hippies, but like they were really more, they were counterculture, but they weren't like, we did live in San Francisco during that period, the Summer of Love. I was a little kid, and there were lots of hippies around, but they didn't look like hippies. My dad was probably a little bit older than that generation, and my mom too. And dad was a poet, and he bailed out of the University of Chicago PhD program to go join the movement out in California to write poetry and be part of the scene. They weren't like huge drug users, like, that part of it was not something that I experienced, right. Like the Joan Didion, that horrible story of the kids being fed acid. That's sure. Not part of our life at all. They were not, they basically were teetotalers. So they didn't drink, smoke, no drugs in the house. So, that's a big difference from the classic. Oh, yeah. But they were people who were trying a different way of living in some ways, and one of those was, not adhering to the, let's say, the mores of certainly my dad's parents, who were, pretty conservative for sure, like Nixon people in Chicago, and finance. The grandfather was in finance, and so they were not at all happy with what was happening in our family. But we were close. We saw them, and yeah, they, what they did was, both my parents were writers and teachers, and they did teach us to love literature. They kept the TV off. I did not have. I was the oldest, and they experimented with taking the TV. It was out of the house or locked up in a closet for, I guess, a couple of years when we lived in the Michigan farmhouse, and they eventually relented when my brother and sister were a little older, and they, I guess, needed something for them to do. So they gave up. But because I went like third to sixth grade without TV. I never really got into it. I never would just sit there and vegetate in front of a TV. So I was a reader, and that's, I'm sure, why I do what I do now. I mean, they raised us. The other thing that they did right, was that, I guess I would say right, is that my brother just pointed this out to me the other day. We were talking, he's 2 years younger, and they raised us to be not materialistic. It wasn't about like what kind of car do you drive or how does your house look. And I mean, of course, I wanted cool clothes, and I always wished that my parents had, a house with a white picket fence, and
Right.
The classic, like Dad got up and carried a briefcase to the office and we had a station wagon. I actually longed for that when I was younger. That kind of stability was not there, but we are not materialistic. And I think my brother just pointed that out to me recently, and I thought, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, even though I cover, for many years, I've covered politics, right? Really started out covering it in Springfield, Illinois, when I graduated from college down there in Central Illinois. I've been covering people who are just laser focused on getting power. And my job, as I saw it, was always to, expose their corruption. Or at least that was a lot of what we tried to do. And it really was only again until recently, when I covered the Trump campaign in 15 and 16, and when he got elected, when I started to think about how I really didn't understand people who crave power, even though I've spent a lot of time studying what they do. I don't understand their psychology. And that it has something to do with our raising also. The issue of like not understanding power, even though I've written about powerful people a lot. So that's hippie-ish childhood for you.
And let me jump into that since you brought that up. Did covering the Trump campaign, did that change you in any way?
Yeah. Yes, it did. It changed me in, I guess, I would say that the summer of 16 was one of the most stressful summers of, my life, because of trying to keep up with what was going on. The dumping of the Hillary emails on us halfway through that summer was, it changed the way that we do our work, because the Steve Bannon's flood the zone with shit concept, which is brilliant. It is what the Russians do in what, these autocrats would, certainly in a developed country like ours, with a complex media ecosystem. That was genius. Because what happened was, from that point on, especially after Trump got elected, but even that summer before, we didn't know what hit us in the media, and we were still trying to do things that the way we'd always covered politics. They're still doing that, actually. You see that happening right now. I'm not in it the way that I used to be. I approach it differently. But, what happened was, every day, certainly once he got in, every day there were like 5 things happening that you knew, if it was normal times, you would spend a month or 2 investigating it, and then you would win the Pulitzer Prize for exposing this epic sort of corruption. But it was happening on steroids. It was 5 things every day, the emoluments clause and the racism and the, just complete bare-knuckled kleptocracy and the disgusting pandering to the lowest common denominator of everything, and the people that he was bringing in to the cabinet, where you started to look at, they're not every one of them, but many cronies, corrupt, and so there was just a lot more going on that you had to pay attention to, and it was impossible to do that. And so, and you could see like these disinformation things were going on. People were siloed off, which actually was not a Trump. That's not a something that Trump created. That's part of our ecosystem, our media ecosystem. And that's actually what provoked me to sit down and write that novel, or actually it's the basis for that, because I think the book is about the Vegas. It opens with the Vegas massacre of 2017. I mean, it's fictionalized, but you can see that that's what it is. And I stuck very closely to that. But then I invented characters who were who were journalists or truth tellers, confronted with trying to understand what's going on in this ecosystem of using public trauma for political gain and mass disinformation, and the sense among the public, which has been bubbling and building ever since JFK assassination. And that is, that's underlying all of this, that there are things that are going on that we don't know, we don't understand. There's this mirror world where some other things are happening. The whole conspiracism of our society. And so that's what the novel is about. And I wrote it because I think it's very short, and I'm going to write more of them, because I think I've come to the conclusion, I love journalism and I love what I do, and I love being on the scene and so on, all the things that we, journalists love to be in the middle of chaos. But I think sometimes fiction can get more to the heart of the truth than the truth-telling of nonfiction. And I'm not saying throw the facts out, but I'm saying that you can explain what is happening better if you can do it through fiction and go to people's inner lives, which is what I was trying to do. Long answer to the question.
Do you feel, I think if what I heard you say is fiction gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of, okay, yes, I can see that, yes.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, you're not tethered to the facts. And the problem is with covering Trump, of course, is that you are we tether ourselves to the facts, but the information ecosystem is filled with people who's fake journalists calling themselves journalists who are actually influencers, which you see what just happened with a bunch of them, where they were like, oh yeah, it's getting $100,000 a week, but well, I didn't know it was Putin, like, I mean, the only person who could say, I didn't know where that 400 grand came from is Elon Musk. They're man, right? The only person on Earth, on planet who would go, well, I didn't notice $400,000 suddenly showed up in my bank account. You think those guys down in Tennessee or wherever they're based with their little basement operations, broadcasting, it's like, you think that they didn't notice they suddenly had some hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing in every week?
Yeah, that might spike your curiosity a little bit, huh?
Oh my God. I mean, maybe if that happened to me, you'd go, I'm not going to look the gift horse in the mouth. But when the gift horse says, Das Vidanya, comrade, well, maybe. Maybe that would be your first clue.
Right. Oh, yeah. And you said something, though, that I hadn't really thought about, but that is true. It seems they did go out of their way to give the appearance of just some kind of stodgy little basement setup, that didn't have a massive influx of money coming. And they were, just kind of shoestringing it. But as we know now, those were some expensive shoestrings.
I don't know. I mean, maybe they didn't upgrade their systems. Maybe they just put it in the bank and were going for wanting the yacht or the gated, community or mansion or something.
True.
I don't. I mean, maybe they didn't reinvest it in their gear, but whatever. It's absolutely fascinating. what a development. And at least, the DOJ is on top of it a little bit. I mean, they've been
Right.
so slow to act for too long, I think. And where are the sheepdogs? They have not been around.
No, that's we'll get to that in a moment, because that's been a real sore spot of mine.
Yep.
I want to talk about something for just a moment because it played such a vital role in where I am today politically. Although I voted for Barack Obama in 2008, I still always considered myself a Republican. I had always voted Republican. My family, although there were some exceptions, for the most part, I mean, it was a rural Midwest, right? It's just everybody around you was like that, so you just, that's how it happened with me anyway. What I'm embarrassed to say it, but for most of my young voting life, there wasn't a lot of thought that went into. I just knew I was a Republican, and Republicans vote for Republicans. It's embarrassing to say that now, but that's the truth.
That's people do. I mean, look, we're politically attentive people, but most people aren't, and that's hard for us to, or at least in my group, it's hard for us to get out of this head and go, people down the road with the Trump signs, maybe they're paying attention, but a lot of people aren't paying attention, and they're not paying attention. They may not even have their signs. I mean, obviously, the people who don't have the signs out right now are those, in Pennsylvania, which is right across the river. Looking out those windows behind me, I can see Pennsylvania across the river, and that's the big swing state, right? And the swing voters they're like normal. They aren't thinking about this stuff. They're just doing their thing. They're mowing the lawn, or they're getting ready for the birthday party, or they're having a baby, or they're dealing with their parents' cancer or whatever. They're just not in the head that we are, where we're just paying such close attention. So I don't hold against them that. I kind of do now, because I feel like, I mean, what's going on in our country has to have penetrated. I just don't. I actually don't understand how you could not be paying attention, but I don't actually hold it against them either, because I just think people's lives are like, there's just more going on, and my God, like, especially if you're working in the trades here and you got to get up 5 a.m. and go work on somebody's house or something. And I get it.
I've got a neighbor 2 houses down, just retired, a pharmacist. I've probably known him 40 years. Okay. Not that we've been really close friends, but in a small town, everybody knows everybody, and you interact or cross paths with most people on a frequent basis. I never knew what his political affiliation was. I never had any idea. I doubt that he knew what mine was. But the guy has an embarrassing amount of Trump flags and signs, not just one, multiple, on his house, in his yard. And see, someone like that, who I know has a higher education, he had a career as a pharmacist, so if you were inept at some point, your license would have been removed and you'd have had to find another profession. So I look at someone in that situation and I ask the question, how does someone with that kind of analytical thinking ability wind up getting sucked in? And sadly, it comes back, at least for me, to some pretty simple ideas. And I believe it's as simple as their emotional brain has hijacked their prefrontal cortex, and it's a lot less involved than the emotional centers of their brain. Although when you challenge them on it, that's where they will kick the prefrontal cortex back in, or attempt to, to rationalize why they feel as they do, but their gut feeling with Trump is lacking in logic, which brings me back to where I was going to go. I got sidetracked. So your book, Virus, Vaccinations, the CDC, and the Hijacking of America's Response to the Pandemic, that was the pivotal moment for me. That is when I was so disgusted that I'd not only decided I would be voting for Joe Biden, I wanted to dissociate with the Republican Party completely. I wanted no connection to it, and for me, the most sensible way to do that was identify as a Democrat.
What was it? What was it about the pandemic that kicked you over to this?
What it was about the pandemic. I was a hospital corpsman when I was in the Navy. The Army would call that a medic. And then I did some nursing for 2 or 3 years after I left the Navy before I pursued the different path on the psychology track. But I'm one of those people who had such an interest in those fields that when I left nursing, I still subscribed to nursing journals because it interests me so much. I still read medical journals. So my career changed, but not necessarily my interest. And so I was watching that, as millions of Americans in a similar situation were. Physicians, nurses, healthcare providers, with a foundation of the scientific method and how critical in a time like that the experts in the various fields having to do with public health are. I watched these very ambiguous statements he was making, like, give it a couple of weeks and it'll be gone, just like it vanished. First of all, I knew that's not how it works, right? That there was nothing about that had even 1 foot in truthfulness. You don't have a pandemic or an emerging pandemic that all of a sudden it's gone. I don't know what happened. That's just not how it works. And as time went on and these crazier and crazier claims that he was making, it wasn't just that he was making those. I already knew he was prone to saying very stupid things. What I didn't know was how resistant he was to letting somebody else have what he felt like was the spotlight. How resistant he was to the idea that somebody else knew more about something than he did. He was guarding that as much as anything, and then there's how it was going to impact the election aspect of it. Now, at that time, clearly, we hadn't yet had hundreds of thousands of people die, or we certainly hadn't passed the 1 million mark. But my background gave me just enough knowledge to know that the way he was handling it, we were probably going to see that number of deaths. And I was just furious. I was enraged. And at the time, the only thing I could do to vent was I just jumped on social media. I didn't just want to change parties. I didn't want to just leave Trump and the Republican Party. I wanted to make it known that, hey, I was once one of those people. I'm not now. I'm disgusted. I'm going to be disgusted for a long time, and I'm going to write about it. So that's one reason your book, when I saw that, I was like, oh, cool. She wrote a book on this. This may be a kind of such a broad question that it's hard to know exactly what I'm asking for, but just however you perceive the question. If you had to boil it down to one concept that encapsulated several things that described the flaws and I guess the dereliction of duty, in my opinion, or the negligence of our leader, did it come down to something as simple as ego as a driving force, or did you find there were other factors that superseded Trump's ego?
Well, I mean, there was money,
Sure.
which is, right up there with ego for him. Probably the same in some ways thing. But yeah, I mean, the utter complete lack of empathy, the inability to care, I think what was at the bottom of it. I think money, I mean, definitely money. That, they were on track, to have this economy was humming along and he was going to win. And then, so he was, this was a big, this was the problem. This was going to stop him from being able to win. It was also going to stop him from raking in more bucks. And the people around him, like Mnuchin and Kushner, are hardcore MBA market capitalists, and that entails what the Naomi Klein book, Chaos Capitalism, or what is it called, the shock doctrine, right? So
Right.
This was the shock that could be used to make money, and they saw it that way. That was part of it. I mean, obviously he wanted to stay in power, but the people like Kushner, remember when they set up the, again, this is the problem with what's going on here, is that there's so many things that were happening every day that we can't even keep them all, so many outrages that was almost impossible to keep them in our heads. And that, there are things in my book that I'm sure I've forgotten about, but like when they, they needed the ventilators, and the states that were really hard hit, like New York, which, ravaged the neighborhood where I have an apartment. That was where the frontline workers, the grocery store, the CTA were, that's Chicago, the metro workers, the subway people, EMTs, those people, we were getting sick and dying right away. And it was virulent in the beginning. And they needed these ventilators. They thought that was what was going to keep people going. And they had no other means. And he said to the states, to the governors, something like, well, you should bid against each other. Competition is good. At that moment, he reverts to, or he can't get beyond the, MBA market capitalist mentality, because he has no compassion. But also, so does Kushner, who then they set up, he puts Kushner in charge of procurement. And Kushner doesn't know what he's doing, but he likes to keep it in the family because this is a gang, and that's how they operate. So the family member gets to run the procurement operation for the PEPs. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, the nurses were wearing, as you remember, black garbage bags.
Yes.
The richest country in the world, they were wearing black garbage bags like they wouldn't even do in the Central African Republic. And that's what was going on in New York City. And he says to Cuomo, well, you should compete against each other, because that's what we do. This is a market, and, may the best man win, or may the biggest price win, the highest price, or maybe you can get a better deal on it if you bargain with each other. It was so disgusting. And, so to me, yes, money is greed, but underlying all that is a complete and utter absence of ability to be compassionate and feel empathy for people. And that's the hallmark of Trump. And then the other part of the hallmark is what you just said, where he was saying, well, it's just going to disappear in a week. That is the essential Trump is really the circus barker, the Oz, the PR man, whose motto is, and as Ivanka wrote in her book, his genius is that it doesn't matter what reality is. It's all about perception. And this is who he is. If he says, and in fact, the disgusting Rich Lowry column in the Times, which I don't know if your listeners are paying this as close attention to this stuff, but they actually put the National Review editors encomium to Trump and why he's going to win. And Rich actually wrote, one of his, the genius of Trump is that he can, if he says things enough times that people will believe it. He never relents. And basically what he was saying was, yeah, he's able to lie and repeat the lies, which is actually what we know he does. But to repeat the lies until people's brains are like mush and they think that's real. And that's his genius, according to Rich Lowry and people on that side who, like your neighbor, are, I think some of these upper middle class people who support him are not completely involved as on an emotional level. I think they're looking at their bank accounts and they're going, this guy is going to keep me from paying any more taxes. That's for sure what a lot of the rich people who support him are doing. Schwartzman, they all got back on board, the corporations. I mean, it's about the bottom line.
It is.
Getting off track. So back to the virus, if you want to talk about that.
I can confirm your last statement that they aren't really engaged and that it's, for many of them, all about the money. I know this because my neighbor and I exchanged words in a conversation outside of our houses one evening, and I essentially said, look, Dave, you're an educated man. This blows my mind. And his first response to me was, do you have a 401k? And I did what I just did. I just kind of laughed in disgust and disbelief. And I thought, my God, like that's the only issue there is. I guess the 1 million plus dead Americans from COVID, that didn't bother you, even though you were working in a pharmacy that entire time and getting a firsthand look at part of what was going on in our community. And at that point, I realized the futile nature of continuing to try to talk to somebody whose response to me was asking me if I had a 401k. I thought, I think I'll just go mow the yard because I'm not going to get I'm not going to get a rational engagement here.
But to them, that is rational.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up.
It's every man for himself. And it's, it's the bottom line. And that's what they're, that it's wolfishness. It's the capital, the end result of just unfettered market capitalism. And they're all in with this guy because, well, he's the vehicle by which they can carry out and carry on as they have been. Now, I think, all of the other things that he's doing, well, the word salad, the ridiculous, but also the criminality is like they don't care. And they certainly don't care about what he's doing to women. I mean, that's actually part of the the benefit, the side, make sure that women are home and not in your way, or, I don't know. It's just so craven.
And I know that's a huge area of importance for you, women's rights and reproductive rights, the whole gamut of how our political spectrum impacts women. How were you early on in your career? Because I don't know that this is true of you. It looks like on paper it probably was, but I'm making some assumptions that I see you as somebody who early on was like this fearless, I don't mind pushing the envelope. I know what path I want to take. I know some of the things I'll bump into. I'll deal with them when we go head to head. How was it for you as a writer, as a journalist, early in your career?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I was, I came out of college, Midwestern educated, and I would not say that I was super confident. I was very insecure, and I was not, but yeah, I mean, I guess people did think I was pretty, I certainly had a reckless side, and adventurous, and I was game for stuff, but I wasn't confident. It takes a long time to get confident in your writing, anyway. Sure. Anyone doing it, and confident in your style and that kind of thing. So that took many years. But I was ambitious, and I guess that was part of it. But for me, like, I don't know. I mean, I was young when I was young, and let's say in Springfield, Illinois, or then in Chicago, dealing with these powerful men. They, and this is the 80s, early 90s, certainly there was a lot of, I guess, some sexism, or what you would call sexism. I don't, in my memory of those days, I remember more my lack of confidence and insecurities than I remember being mistreated by men that I was working with. I certainly never ever experienced anything like what these Me Too stories were that came out of, after Trump got elected, women started saying, oh, this guy did this, or, these were people I knew, like Mark Halperin, ABC News guy. He was like the dolt, like the incredibly, just a block of wood. Like, he wasn't interesting, and he certainly wasn't flirtatious or in any way harassing. And then you come to find out, he would lock interns in, or he would be in this room in his office, and you get an intern, and he would jerk off in front of the intern.
Sure.
Or, the 20-year-old. And I'm like, it doesn't even compute. But it also doesn't compute because if somebody had done that when I was in my 20s, I've talked to my friends about this. We're like, we would have laughed, or we would have run out the door. I mean, I just don't understand that. Like, I know there's that scared rabbit thing that they talk about, but I just don't understand that dynamic. I never had anything like that. I had overtly insulting men probably saying things to me, probably, making fun of the way I looked, or, but, never did I have any kind of workplace harassment at that level. I never encountered it. And that's not to say, again, that they weren't sexist and that there wasn't like some kind of subterranean or subliminal kind of thing going on. But it was always there. What was always obvious, especially when I got to Washington, in the Clinton, if Clinton got elected, I got taken to Washington, or dispatched, and I loved it. I was so happy to be there, and I worked at the Time Bureau, and there were a lot of old timers there. And what I did know then was that there were women in the office, but that our ideas and our suggestions were, I didn't think, getting taken very seriously. I didn't have a lot of input into like the decision making. Now, again, I was very junior, and there were a couple women who were pretty senior, and I think they certainly were confident, and they were listened to. One of them covered the FBI, I think, and one of them covered campaign finance. They were terrific journalists. I worked with another one who's been at the Post for years. I think she's retired. These were terrific journalists, and I'm not saying that they weren't given their due, but there was a general feeling that the younger women, our group of women, the ones that were my age, we were not maybe on the same level as the guys who were our age. And coming from the Midwest also and going to Washington, I always tell people this, the first thing I noticed was I knew a lot about the Clintons because I had spent all this time in Little Rock, and that's why they dispatched me to Washington. And as soon as I got there, I was meeting these people who were men who were, pretty authoritative in the way they would speak. They had these voices of authority, and I knew they didn't know what they were talking about, and I couldn't like get around that. There was just this wall of like authoritative speak, and that still kind of goes on in the media. Especially in the TV world. I mean, people are trained to talk like that, to sound like they know what they're talking about. And I think now that I'm older, I probably have crossed the line where I can sound authoritative. And I just think, when you're young and female, you're assumed not to have authority. And I think that was a problem. So yeah, there was sexism. There are all the other things that women have to deal with on top of that, like our bodies. I mean, it's just, when you're young and hormones and you can get pregnant at any time, or you have to think about birth control pills. And, there's a lot going on with young women and health. And that's another reason why this assault on reproductive health is so outrageous, because it's not just abortion. It's the Planned Parenthoods. My daughter went to one in New York. She's going to school out of the country, and she needed to get some birth control pills or something. They're like closing down in New York City. They're running out of money. It's a complete mystery. That's a story that needs to be done. One of these days I'll get around to it. What is going on in this state, this big blue state where they're shutting down Planned Parenthoods?
Yeah,
I'm about to go to
nuts.
Texas to do a story on what's going on with the these, thousands, tens of thousands of women, millions actually are affected. But, every day there are thousands of women in the state of Texas and all these other states where they've done these laws who are in dire need of birth control and abortions. And if not abortions, the DNC that you need if you take that pill, or if you're just having a miscarriage. They can't do anything to them. They can show up at an emergency room and they have to bleed out in their own house before they come back. Now, this is not something that men have ever experienced, but I can tell you it is terrifying. It's terrifying to have a miscarriage. It's terrifying to bleed like that. And they just say, oh, go home and, call us when it's out, and then it's incredible. I'm going down there soon, actually, to do a story about I'm just going with somebody to through the whole process. And, they have to drive like 26-hour round trips if they don't take the pill, if they don't get the pill in the mail, or they don't want to take the pill in the mail, which, by the way, the pill in the mail it's not great. Like, it works, but again, you want to be under a doctor's care when you're doing that, because you're bleeding and you can have a lot of problems. And you cannot go to a doctor. If you take that pill in Texas, you can't go to the ER if you think something's going wrong and say, I just took this pill. They instruct them to say, I'm having a miscarriage. You cannot tell your provider what's going on with your body. That's insane. This is the richest country in the world, most technologically advanced. And, our 50% of the population is reduced to Taliban level, breeding stock. I mean, anyway, right. You got me started, and I'm not going to, I made my point.
No, that's exactly
you're
why.
You're a medic. You were a medic. I mean, these are things that, it's a scary thing. If you don't have care from a nurse and you're bleeding, it's a scary thing. And this is what's going on with people. Thousands and thousands of women a day are reduced to putting up with this crap.
Right. I, as a former medic nurse, again, it's one of those things that's so infuriating because it just violates so many of the principles that are embedded within me that it's hard to get my head around. That's why I love to let people who know a lot more about it than I talk for as long as they want, because I learn a lot, and I think even
I mean, I don't know more about it than you. You're a medic. I don't actually know the medical things that OBGYNs do. I just I'm on the receiving end of that. I've had 2 children, but again, like thousands and thousands and thousands of women daily are putting up with this. And I am not saying that you should use abortion as birth control. I don't think it's a good idea to have willy-nilly going to get an abortion and have sex and then, oops, sorry, let's do this thing. Especially when there's easy access to birth control. And if there is easy access to it, you will have fewer of these surgical abortions. But I'm not saying that should be the way that you should, operate. The women should be responsible. But again, why is it just the women that have to be responsible for this? The men are making the babies. So what is, anyway, all this.
Well, no, that brings up the next thing I want to ask you about, because I know you are really big on the idea of separation of church and state, right? As I am. How much, and I think anecdotally, most people have a sense of what the answer to this is, but from your perspective and from the experiences and the writing and research that you have done, how much of this do you think comes back to religion? At the end of the day, how much of this is originates from and driven by religion?
You mean in the courts? In the courts, it's entirely driven by religious people. It's entirely that. I mean, this is I have a piece in the New Republic today about Project 2025 where I quote somebody saying, this is like a massive conspiracy of a small group of people who are hyper-religious. This thing that's happened in the courts and it is. And I'm actually writing a piece about Catholics, hard-right Catholics in Washington for New York Magazine right now, that's going to be out in a couple weeks. And they captured the courts. And yes, it is religious. It is a dream of the religious right to control female fertility. I mean, to have women be controlled so that men can decide what to do with them, when to have babies and so on. And it's a very ancient battle, really, between the sexes. I mean, it's like kind of the oldest war in the world. This issue of like who gets to decide, when you have a baby, is and really power between men and women, power in the household, power in the workplace. It's like this constant, there's a conflict there that's been there forever. And we live in a patriarchal society, and so the religious folks are, I mean, again, I grew up around the Amish and I grew up around the Mennonites, and I don't have a problem with Christians. Like, a lot of my friends are like, oh, it's the Christians. Well, there are actually good Christians out there, just as there are good Muslims and good Jews.
Sure. Whatever
else religion you want to be. But these sects are, they're looking for something more. And especially the hard right Catholics, which again, they've been overlooked, because when we talk about the religious right in this country, for years, what we were talking about were the hayseed down in Louisiana, like Mike Johnson, who thinks the dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time and that God made everything 6,000 years ago, and they have theme parks to celebrate that, right? And or they listen to Jerry Falwell, and they listen to, the televangelists. That's not who's behind what's going on in the courts. These people they're Catholic. They have a tradition of an intellectual tradition of 2,000 years of text and Jesuit. I mean, I'm not blaming the Jesuits. It's actually the Dominicans. That's what their sects. And then the Opus Dei Catholics, who are the hardest right, fascist adjacent. They're in Washington. They are attached to Leonard Leo. They are attached to Samuel Alito. This is a very, very specific hard right sect in the Catholic system. Not even, they don't like Francis. They don't like their Pope, because what they want is this. They're the ones who have introduced into our political discourse ideas like post-liberalism, common good, post-constitutionalism. They're aligned up with people like Peter Thiel, who is not Catholic, but these people who think, well, there's a natural hierarchy, and men like really brilliant men like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who managed to get rich, so they must be super brilliant geniuses, should be able to have as many babies as they want, but also should be running the things because they're the ones who can keep this, country in order. And all of that is being pushed by these people around J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance was converted by them, by this group, and he's their guy. And you just saw yesterday or 2 days ago, I just saw Trump announcing they're putting together a Catholics for Trump organization. Well, the majority of American Catholics are not on board with this stuff, but the ones who are, they have fanatically, with Leonard Leo running the, bagman for big money, they have fanatically focused on amicus brief after amicus brief after amicus brief for 20 years in the Supreme Court. There's a guy in Princeton, there's a guy in Harvard, that these guys are writing amicus briefs, pushing the court, giving them arguments to overturn Roe, but going much further now. And they work quietly. The Opus Dei does not put a sign up on the door saying they're Opus Dei, but they have a building in Princeton. They have a building at Harvard, I think. They've infiltrated the Ivy League schools. They churn out these people like Amy Coney. Well, Amy Coney Barrett is from another sect, but all of these other guys, the Scalias, the Kavanaugh. Well, Kavanaugh's just a political hack, but Alito, these hardcore believers. Clarence Thomas, they seed up their offices with their clerks who are coming out of these schools, these schools of thought. So that's the religious element here. That's the effective religious element, and they are extremely effective in taking over the courts, and they're about to take over the government, because Kevin Roberts in the Project 2025 is a document filled with people from that sect whose names are in there, like Severino. They're going to put Severino in charge of the HHS. He was already in there. He's going to come back. He's the guy who wrote the HHS part of Project 2025, right?
Right.
So it's a sect within a sect within a sect. They're hard right. They are absolutely not in line with most American Catholics, and they're definitely not in line with most Americans. And they have seized power in Washington. And if he is elected, they are going to be running rampant in the court system. They've already got it set up. They have a base of laws that they're ready to use to turn things around into the way they want things to be. Now, all that said, you know what? There are problems with the Constitution right now. There are problems in our country that are really, really, there are big problems.
Agreed.
And the Constitution is not solving them.
Right.
The way, the 18th century writers did not anticipate what's going on here at all. They couldn't possibly have.
No.
With the siloed off information, the uneducated voter, the low information voter, and the Electoral College. That's the one thing that is, in fact, the way they wanted it to be, because the slavers needed to have their way, and they were going to be the minority. And that's how we got this Electoral College. So the numbers now are showing Harris 20% up on the popular vote is still going to lose.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. Anyway, you got me started.
Let me tell you my big concern, or what I hope is not happening, and then I'll get your feedback on that. You talk about the people who are just filing the amicus briefs and who are ready to just, what I hope is not going to prove to have been the case. It's hard to know for sure for the average person because, as you said, they do work quietly. But we know, as you stated, there are a massive number of very smart attorneys with all the money they need to do anything they need to do, who this is their job 24/7 for the last 4+ years, at least the last 4 years, but we know it went on before that. That's all they do. That's their focus. I envision, when I get this thought of concern. I envision that situation going on, and on our side, you have the equivalent of a public defender who has got a lot of cases, makes time for it when they can fit it in, but it's not their full-time job to be counter-strategizing for what they can assume is happening with like the Heritage Foundation and some of the other.
Well, okay. So when you say the public defender, you're talking about the DOJ or people
Right.
who are on payroll for the government. And it's really not the government side job to defend against. I think what's happening is
True.
it is. I mean, if they go after, let's say, a government, they go after agencies like the Chevron
Right.
case. That was definitely the government had to defend those they have to defend, allow the agency rule that says our experts are better than, or the expert at the agency gets priority over your fake scientist who's saying cigarette smoking is good for you, right? That's what the
right.
Chevron case is,
True.
right? It says science out the window. Let the corporation tell us what to do. Forget the scientist who works for the government who knows if you put Roundup down the drain, you're going to mess up the watershed, right?
Sure.
Well, no, but Roundup or whatever the company is, Bayer or whoever owns it. No, that's not true. It's fine, right?
Yes.
That's those people. But what I think I've learned from, like, I just did, as I said, I did this. It took forever to do this Project 2025 piece because the story kept changing and we had to hold it for various reasons, not to do with me or the changing, but there were things going on in with Heritage Foundation and the company that I work for. But that's a whole other issue. 3, 4, 5 months have gone by. The last iteration of the story is now finally published today. I recommend your listeners to look at it. I hope you'll take a look at it. It's a deep dive into what Project 2025, what people who are in experts, subject area experts think is the worst thing within their subject area that's in that Project 2025, because it's 900 pages long. I actually have a copy of it, the physical copy, even though I'm only using the PDF because I can word search the PDF. But when I went into the Heritage Foundation to interview these guys, they insisted that I take this book with me. And I took it home. Like, I went to dinner with friends. I'm like, should I just leave this in the restaurant? But now that I have it here, I've got friends come over and they're like, oh my God, it exists. Anyway, long story short, interviewed people who are from NGOs and civil society organizations and legal organizations. There are hundreds and hundreds of lawyers and experts who are poring over that document. And they are the ones who raised the alarm, not just the Democratic Party, but they're all of these people that came together, went through this thing with a fine-tooth comb, divided it up amongst themselves, and that's why you see Trump running away from it, and that's why it's a meme now that they have to stick to him, because it actually is what they're going to do. I mean, they may not be able to get everything done, but this is what they're going to try to do, and it's massive, and it's a massive change, and so I don't think it's just within. I think that there is a defense. There's a defense out there. There are people that are defending the ACLU. They're big operations, the ACLU, immigration lawyers. But then there are others that they just don't have. They don't have the power. And they won't have the power if he gets law enforcement behind him, or puts the power of the federal government or the power of the Justice Department onto vengeance, or rounding people up. Okay. When they start to do that, there are going to be a lot of lawyers out there fighting against this.
Yes.
And fighting against these things. But they've, again, because of these hard right Catholics, Leonard Leo, seizing power and seeding the judiciary with people like Eileen Cannon down in Florida, and many, 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 many others. They will venue shop to get these cases in front of the right judge. So, the mechanism is pretty well in place now, and that's, it's a serious battle to the. That's why they say this is the most important election in American history, because on their side, they regard it as that because they can't keep getting elected because their demographic, they're losing the demographic. They can't keep it up, right? So to them, it's like a seat. They have to do this. And from our side, it's, well, what are we going to do? You have to go wake up all these people who are snoozing, not paying attention, or they're going to give it up. And one of the interesting, I was at the DNC in Chicago, and I went, there are things happening all day long, every day, all kinds of interesting things. And I went to one talk by some pollsters who work in Illinois, but they work all over, but they work for Pritzker, but they work all over the country. And they were talking about what swing voters care about. And they basically were saying, oh, shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. Well, for sure, abortion is way down at the bottom, which is interesting. But one of the things they found was, with respect to this thing and what they're talking about doing in here, which is really setting up a Hungarian-style autocracy, or worse, because Trump says there won't be a need to be elected, no more elections. I don't know that he could carry that out. Is that people they talk to were like, oh, yeah, we've heard about it, but he's never going to do that. They're blowing smoke. They're scaring the libs. Right. They don't care. Even the MAGA adjacent people who are like, they might not agree with this either if they really had to pay attention to it. He's just Trump talking. It's not really going to happen. They don't take it seriously. And I actually have a conservative pen pal out in Oklahoma who I really am fond of. And I'll tell you how I met him and all, but it's a long story. But he's a interesting guy, and we talk every couple days. I mean, we email. I've never actually met him. We text or email, and I like to check in, to see what he's thinking, because he doesn't like Trump. He's very pro-energy. He's not one of the energy guys out there, but he's in that big energy state, so they're all about oil and gas.
Right.
And he's a smart guy. He's an engineer. He doesn't, again, like I said, he's a good guy. He goes to church. He's not hardcore, proselytizing, but I'm sure he's, a believer. I'm sure he doesn't like abortion. But he's reasonable, and he's not like climate change doesn't exist. He's in the ag side, but he's one of these people. When I tell, I'm like, okay, I'm doing this, this thing on Project 2025. Lots of fun. All those think tanks, they don't do they're meaningless. With Washington think tank, they can't do anything. It's like, yeah, they can't until they have the power and they are apparatus to pull it off. So take it seriously, folks. But I don't know that, again, I don't, the big job is to break through the wall of inattention.
Your comment about if he can get law enforcement on his side. Yeah. Now, I can speak to this on a small scale very conclusively. Like I said, I live in a community of about 6,000 people. That's that's kids and everybody. So it's fair to say I may not hang out with or do things or with all of them, but I know them all, right? We know they know my name. I know theirs. I know where they live, their grandparents, that kind of community, right? I know for a fact, this isn't speculation, and I'm only saying at least 80% because there are some new hires that I haven't really met yet or had anybody give me feedback on. So with them, I can't know for sure. I know that in the area that I live in, 80% of all police officers, deputies, sheriff, and highway patrolmen, at least 80% of them are Trump supporters. Big time Trump supporters.
Today, in my email, I'm on the Trump campaign email list, and they send me all of their updates. And today he's crowing about the FOP endorsing him. And I actually just put it out on Twitter. I took a picture of it, said, we endorse him and we will support him on election day, which I kind of find a little bit alarming. That wording of like, we'll support him on election day. What does that mean? You're going to be hanging at the polling places with your sidearm, and you're, looking at people or giving them a dirty look, or having people come through who maybe don't want to interact with a cop, all of it. So it's disgusting. That's the cops, but then you also have, you were in the Navy.
Sure.
You also have this question, which I cannot believe that I actually have to think this. And it was on 2020 when I was actually first sort of aware of like, whose side will the military be on?
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the kind of question you only ask in a country like Iraq, or when the shit's hitting the fan in some African country. Which side is the military going to be on?
Right. You don't even have to get to the answer for that to be troubling. The very fact that you are having to ask is troubling. And this is just pure gut, but it's gut from keeping a fairly close eye on veterans on social media and their comments and their feelings and different threads on the internet. I will say this. I think the number of people who have infiltrated the military that are strong MAGA supporters is much higher than we know. I think it's much higher because, and I say than we know, because a lot of the leaders in the military who have spoken to this, as I guess is kind of their normal day-to-day job to do so, they usually try to downplay it, right? They definitely minimize what the numbers might be. I think the numbers are greater than as they would be with any other situation where they're talking about numbers of something negative.
Exactly, and that's why they think the whole polling of the election, Trump versus Harris, is underestimating his support because they call them the shy Trump voter.
Right.
They're embarrassed to say, yeah, we really like that racist.
Yeah, I think I write, and I have been for the last couple of years. I try not to overdo it because, as you know, people can get burnout on a particular idea fairly quickly, and then it's counterproductive. But periodically, I have written about what I think is a very real likelihood that there will be violence associated with the election. Now, I make very clear, I don't know the specifics, the type, or the magnitude of the violence, but I firmly believe that anyone who would say, nah, I don't think there's going to be any significant violence, I just don't buy that. The form that it takes could be, I think we look to, if we are speculating and trying to kind of get an idea in our mind what we can expect to see, we know they know what didn't work last time, right? If I were to guess, it's going to be a much more fragmented right, multiple locations, smaller.
They're talking about assaults on state capitals.
Right. Yeah, that type of thing, where it's so overwhelming. Well, it's almost like a violent equivalent to Bannon's overwhelm. Yeah. So I know you need to go probably pretty quick, so I want to finish up.
I do, because I've got calls. Today's Friday, and I've got a lineup. I told you I'm going to Texas to do the story, and I see there people reaching out to me.
Okay. Well, listen, I knew ahead of time how busy you are, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you having carved out this much time for me. And
I'm honored. I'm honored to. It's fun to talk to you. I'll do it anytime. I've got lots of stories to talk about. I can rant on forever. So
I definitely want. want to have you back sometime for sure. You are a fascinating woman. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for saying that.
You
and
bet.
You too, likewise. And you're in California?
Missouri.
You're in Missouri right now. Okay.
I lived in California, in Southern California, for about 7 years.
Okay. I think you mentioned that when you were emailing me the other day about California.
Every February.
Missouri, I went to Springfield. When I was in Springfield, I went to college near Springfield, and we used to go to Missouri for the canoe rides down the Current River.
Oh, yeah. I've been on the Current.
And then when I was in Springfield as a journalist, when I was older, in my early 20s, we wanted to go find fun. We'd drive to St. Louis.
Oh, yeah, you can find it.
Basically, but compared to Springfield, that was like going to Times Square.
I'll bet it was. Well, listen, enjoy your time in Texas. And,
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.